Hello, welcome to my latest video where I build this Enchanted Forest thingy. I'm sorry it's taken so long to get this video out, but work and an exhibition I had to prepare for got in the way, and I promise the next one won't take anything like as long. And if you wait to the end of the video, I've got some news. The eagle-eyed among you may already have worked it out. I'm trying to laser cut a box for the diorama to sit in, and I want a curve back. So for the first time ever, I'm going to try and use the technique where you slice lines halfway through the wood so it bends easily. I'm not sure how far apart or how deep to go yet, so I'm doing a little test. After the little bits of testing, I decided to go for the whole thing proper, and I was quite amazed at how well it worked. It was a little bit fiddly to glue it all together. I might have made the kerf a little tiny bit smaller. That's the offset you dial in on the laser to allow for the thickness of cut, and making that smaller would make the whole thing hold together tighter. But the setting I used worked okay, so it doesn't really matter. Here I'm just testing the position of the lid. It'll be one of the very last things I ever do, gluing the lid on, as I need access. But it's good to know it seems to have worked pretty well. I'm going to make the forest floor out of XPS foam. These thin blue sheets are made for going under flooring, and they work well for this project. I'm using a template to foam wire cut basic shapes, and I'm stacking 3 so I can get the ground rising slightly as you go back. I want the rock pool to be at the lowest level, so I've sketched its position on the base layer to make sure the upper layers don't cover it. I do a little bit of carving of the layers before gluing them together, as it's easier to get to the edge at this stage. I started with the standing knife, but then I found very coarse sandpaper did a much faster job, and I like the way it tore into the foam, leaving a very ragged edge, which I think is far more natural. And then it's sticking all together, weighing it down because I'm using the foam Gorilla Glue, and that expands when it dries, so you must weigh it all down. Now it's all glued together, I can start the contouring proper, and I thought using a wire brush might be a good idea, but it wasn't quite quick enough, and I soon reverted to the super coarse sandpaper, which took chunks out very easily. The pool has been made by artificially arranging rocks around its perimeter. So to make these rocks, I'm just tearing out pieces of foam and using my fingernails to peel away the edge. I find this leaves a very rock-like surface, and once you push rolled up tinfoil or an actual lumpy stone into the surface, it finishes the illusion off perfectly. A quick hot gluing the rocks into position and the main pool is done. There's going to be a stream that runs through the whole scene, going into the pool and just creeping over the front edge, so I need the perimeter stones there to just be slightly lower. What I need now is to dot about some rocks all over the diorama, and particularly in the line of the little spring that's going to meander down. I have this little handheld wire cutter, came free with the tabletop one I've got. You can conveniently bend the wire into any shape you want, so I'm using it to further contour the land and dig out the stream bed. It doesn't have a lot of power, so you're watching it cut at 200% speed, but it was free, so can't complain. The last thing to do is bash everything with a tinfoil ball. This gives everything a lovely rock texture that dry brushing will pick out. And now it's on to the main tree. The structure of this is going to be copper wire salvaged from some cable, some multi-coil cable. And I want to get a large bundle of this, slightly more than twice the length as the tree will be high. This is because I'm going to fold it in half and wrap it round, and I found my Leatherman convenient for this, and twist from there. This is so at a later stage I can cut open the bottom end and use that as the root system. The whole process of this wire tree is quite straightforward. You just divide the bundle of wires in half and then twist them around each other, each one of those halves being divided again and twisted. You keep doing that until you run out of wire. You can add a little bit of variation in there by not being exactly half and half, or stop the twisting and start dividing a little bit earlier or a little bit later, and you'll get a natural variation. After cutting the root end in half, I can free the Leatherman and then treat the roots as a mini tree and doing it in exactly the same way as the main upper part. Final thing is then to give the trunk and branches some random bends, as you don't want everything to be dead straight. That would look unnatural. The tree needs fattening up, and there's a lot of ways of doing it, but I'm going to use some Super Sculpey for the main bulky areas, and then I'll move on to Milliput for the thinner bits. I'm a bit worried the Super Sculpey might burn on the thin bits when you oven dry it. It's probably not necessary, but I'm using some liquid Sculpey to put on the wires before squishing the Sculpey around it. The liquid Sculpey is a sort of Sculpey glue. I can imagine it'd be very useful for adding fresh Sculpey to already baked Sculpey. As a final touch, I sculpt some basic tree bark texture into the trunk. The Sculpey gets baked at 200 degrees C for half an hour or so. Then I continue the process, but this time with Milliput, which is a two-part kind of a epoxy putty, which air dries to a rock hard finish. I position the tree where it's going to end up in the diorama, and then add some extra roots that will fit the contours of the land, and I can just leave it in position and wait for the Milliput to dry. I had a load of mixed up Milliput left over, so rather than waste it, I thought I'd use it to cover the forest floor with more tree roots and vines and things. To make a load of background trees, I had a different idea. So I got a load of dowels and partially broke them in various places, and then just used some glue to make this broken position permanent, which is basically just to stop them looking unnaturally straight. Once the glue had set, I go about trimming up the trunks, cutting away any poking out bits from the sort of green stick fracture I've done on the wood. I also sharpen one end that's going to ultimately jammed into the foam base to secure it in place. I then start adding some smaller branches, which are selected bits of sea foam. I just drill a little hole and glue them in place. Then using some Milliput, I make a good smooth transition between the sea foam and the trunk. Plus I use the Milliput to make a simple root system at the bottom. And very quickly I have a large number of background trees. I'm finding this little silicone sculpting tool very useful with Milliput, as the Milliput seems to stick to wood or steel very easily, but not to this silicone. Milliput dried, I can now position the trees around the edges of the diorama, making sure not to space them too evenly, as that would look unnatural. In real life, things clump together, and the long extension of the dowels below the roots makes them very secure. To finish off the main tree, I glue sea foam to the ends of all the wire ends, greatly increasing the amount of small branches and twigs. I slide the diorama back into its box and thankfully it still fits. Then I mark the maximum height the dowel tree trunks can be. Then using the razor saw I've just bought to replace the one I lost, which I found mere hours before the new one arrived from Amazon, and simply trim everything to height. All the foam areas get multiple layers of Mod Podge painted on, paying particular attention to where I'm going to pour some resin for the pond and stream that runs into it. And on the final layer of Mod Podge, I decide to sprinkle some chinchilla sand into the wet Mod Podge just to give the land texture in a bit of a head start. After the Mod Podge had dried, there was still quite a lot of the sand loose, so I mixed up some 50-50 PVA glue and water with a few drops of washing up liquid, I think in America you call it dish soap, and thoroughly saturate the whole area, including dropping some bits of debris, odd bits of sticks I found left over from the seafoam and the odd larger stone, and set it to dry overnight. I think a good base for painting this diorama is going to be black, so I've decided to cover everything I can in acrylic black, and while I'm at it, to make sure all the groundwork is in place, I mix quite a lot of PVA glue into the black paint, which will make it look mid-grey, but it will dry matte black. I mix up a slightly bluey grey, and using a dry brush I just skim over the top of all the rocks, and you do this several times while making that grey lighter down to a final pure white in a few spots. At the same time you can introduce some extra colours and put them here and there, gives the whole thing a bit of extra interest. I now get to play with the static grass applicator, and it's very simple. Just brush down some PVA glue where you want the grass to stick, put the grass in the applicator and give it a shake, all over in seconds. But what they don't tell you is some of that static grass likes to get down the back of your neck and you stay itchy for days, but small price to pay. I sprinkle more general forest floor debris over everything and then saturate everything in diluted PVA once more. I really want everything to be rock solid and nothing to fall off. Right, time to paint some figures in hyperspeed. I've still got a lot to learn with figure painting, so I'm not going to do a tutorial on it. I don't think I'm good enough yet, and there's plenty of brilliant channels out there devoted to figure painting. One of my main problems is being able to see well enough, all due to old eyes. I've got some various magnifying devices, but they've all got terrible depth of field, and the whole thing going in and out of focus when you're trying to paint is annoying. But while I'm editing this video, I have just received some cheapish dental loops, and on a quick try they do have a much better depth of field, although the working area is just a tiny little circle in the middle. So next time I have to paint a figure, I'll give them a go and report back. Now the fun part, populating the diorama with all the figures I've painted. So the first one in is the main character, and I'd built up a little pile of stones for her to stand on. Getting her in position is a bit fiddly, thanks to all the trees in the way. We put those there. I have a stag in the background to lurk there and generally not be seen. I have the top of the head of some creature that is emerging out of the pond. I'm hoping this is going to be very difficult to see, and only after looking at the diorama for a while you might notice it, which adds an extra intrigue into the story of what's going on. Some fairies and a pixie, and the figure population is done. I now need to turn my attention to the box. How am I going to get a suitable scene onto the walls and ceiling? I had considered just painting it, but I should have done that on the walls before assembling the box while it was still flat. To do it now would be very tricky, so I decided to resort to printing a backdrop and just gluing it in place. Also, I needed a way of getting light into the ceiling, as it stands the box is too deep and too gloomy. I thought random shafts of light would be best, so I go back to the laser cutter and cut random shapes into the top. I thought the light would penetrate through the paper enough, but it didn't, so I had to cut my way through the whole thing. And as it turns out, the canopy picture I put on the ceiling I didn't like in the end, so I just painted the whole thing black. Now the scary bit, pouring resin into the pool. I have some already opened 2-part resin, and on the box it says once opened, use within 6 months, and this must be a good year old. So I do a little test piece, including dropping some acrylic ink in there to give it a tint, and the end result seems perfect, so no need to throw the old resin away and buy new. Very pleased about that. So I mix up the 50-50 2-part resin and very slowly add some colour. I only want a slight hint of murky water. I use a red and a green together. Red and blue would have been better, but I can't find the blue, so green's close-ish. After I've given the resin a thorough stirring, I pour it into a fresh pot to stop any unmixed resin on the walls of the pot ending up in the final pour. I then immediately decided the pot's way too big to get amongst all the trees, so I used an even smaller one to do the actual pouring, and it's all very much fingers crossed now, waiting to see what happens. I had this last minute thought that to soften the transition between the walls and the ground, I'll put a load of lichen, however you're supposed to pronounce it, around the edge, and hopefully I'll improve things. A quick trim around the edges and we're done. The diorama fits inside the box quite snugly, and you could probably get away with just jamming it in there and leaving it, but I decided to do a little bit of tacking with just some PVA. I had considered using hot glue, really fix it in there, but I don't think it's necessary. I'll just clean up the front with a little bit of paint and it's finally finished. Thank you for watching another video by Dodgy Dioramas. Once again, I promise the next video won't be anywhere near as long as this one. Oh, and I nearly forgot. At the beginning I said there was some news, and that's I've made memberships available. So if you'd like to support the channel, I'll be eternally grateful. Click on the join button to see all the details. Thank you and goodbye.